So Nitin, I think a lot of people have a misconception about Mowgli, given the history of the Disney film of the Jungle Book. This is very different from that. So can you talk just a little bit about your involvement in this and this more faithful adaptation of the Rudyard Kipling novels?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's it's important to know that because this is about Andy going back to the original source material and really finding a world that is about Andy's vision of this and an interpretation of it. And so my job, I felt, was to really find my way into Andy's vision and his imagination, and also to really capture the essence of Mowgli himself, played beautifully by Rohan Chand, and the character in a lot of ways, in that he's in the same way that I guess I was growing up as British Asian in England. I kind of felt, that whole metaphor in a way of him coming to terms with his identity at puberty between the world of animals and men. It was a very strong kind of motif to kind of riff from, musically, and I really enjoyed doing that.
That's really interesting. I mean, so how did you, I guess, having this sort of personal connection to the material in a way, how did that influence your music?
I think it influenced it in a lot of ways. I mean, what I did was I wanted to keep, I was aware that this was a score that needed to appeal to a mass audience, but also I wanted to retain that authenticity with the Indian classical tradition. So you have instruments like the swaleen, which is a very unusual instrument, which is a cross between an Indian classical sarangi and a Western violin. You've got the bansuri, which is a kind of bamboo flute that's played by Ashwin Srinivasan, that has that classical flavor. Obviously, we had an 87-piece orchestra recorded at Air Studios, and then we had Indian classical instruments for percussion like the mridangam, the pakvaj, the tabla, and in addition to all of that, we also had the bean, which was used, which is kind of like a snake charming instrument that was used to capture the essence of Car, played by Kate Blanchett. So we wanted to, as much as possible, have this, without being contrived in any way, broaden the palette of musical sounds and flavors. I mean, singer-wise, we've also used people like Dhruv Sangari, who comes from a traditional Sufi Qawwali background too, in the same way that people like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan did. So it's got all of that, but because I've got a classical background with orchestral music too, I kind of really enjoyed. It was a really great opportunity to bring together those worlds in a way that felt like there was justification to do so. Yeah.
Right. You kind of mentioned this before, but I wonder if you could just delve in a little bit deeper. I mean, there's the sounds of the jungle, if you will. I mean, how do you capture that?
I think, at times I really enjoyed using, again, not just the bansuri with the Indian bamboo flute, but kind of Western classical woodwind to kind of get this feeling of insects kind of in the background. So I was trying to marry the sound of the orchestra and the music with the sounds of the jungle, so it didn't feel like they were too separate. And at times as well, we wanted to create diegetic music, so the feeling of actually having music in the scenes. I went over to South Africa with Andy and spent time musically supervising one scene, which was a festival of colors. And for that, we'd pre-recorded some sounds from Indian classical musicians. But again, it needed to feel like it was actually happening at the time in the place we were in. And it was great to spend time actually kind of walking through, foliage and jungle and so on with Andy, which actually also gave me a sense of place too.
And there's a real epic scale to the film as well, a sense of majesty in it. Can you talk a bit about capturing that in your music?
I think there's nothing that really captures scale and majesty, as you put it, like an orchestra. So obviously I wanted to make sure that the power and the scale of the orchestral soundtrack was very strong, and so we recorded 87 musicians at Air Studios in London, on top of as well as all of the instruments that I've mentioned, and it was really scoring it. I worked also with a great orchestrator. I mean, I orchestrate a lot of my own work quite often, but I also in this case brought in an extra pair of hands because it was such a big job. So it was Nicholas Dodds who worked with me as well, and we really spent time trying to get the orchestral flavor of this right. So it had all of that majesty, it had all of that power and scale, but it still didn't let go of the authenticity and the traditional aspects of the Indian classical music that I wanted to bring in.
Was there a particular moment in the film that was difficult for you to score? I mean, something that you had a hard time wrapping your head around?
Yeah, I think there were a few moments. I mean, for example, finding the beginning is always tricky with a film like this. And so how do you start, you know, with the narrative? And so what we used here was something that has nothing to do with India or anything like that, but just seemed to work as establishing this kind of notion of the law of the jungle. So I used Tibetan throat singing at the beginning, and it kind of to create a drone that really felt visceral and quite primitive and primeval. And it kind of worked very well to kind of juxtapose that against Dhruv Singari's voice. But again, it took time to evolve some of these things. And it's about, I guess it was about evolving a vocabulary overall. So once that vocabulary was kind of in a good place, it was a lot easier to score individual scenes.
Working with somebody like Andy Serkis, you did his other film as a director, Breathe. I think they shot this one first, but then there's all the post-production that had to be done, and so then Breathe was technically the second film he directed. But I mean, you couldn't get two more different movies than the two of those.
Yeah.
What is that collaboration like between the two of you?
Well, Andy is also a great musician as well. He's a really good saxophone player and has spent a lot of time playing saxophone and has a really good emotional understanding and intuition about music. And so it's very easy to kind of interact with him musically, but also because he's very clear about his vision. You know, I think he was a graphic artist at one point, so he's got really strong visual ideas in his mind, and so they just immediately sing out at you. You know, I mean, for example, at one point I had 4 different images on QuickTime of Mowgli and different scenes of Mowgli, and I would play piano against those in order to find a theme that worked across each of those different moods and different experiences of Mowgli. So it was about not just capturing him in one mood or one place, but also really evolving a score that would feel like it complemented his narrative and his hero's journey. And I think that's what really Andy wanted, was to really find the heart of Mowgli before we kind of got into anything else.
In addition to the song, you also wrote an original song for the movie called Changes. Can you tell us a little bit about that song, where the idea came from, and recording it?
Yeah, that was a song with Cara Marnie, who's signed to First Access. I wrote the song originally to really capture the narrative of Mowgli and to capture the feeling of Mowgli. So I did the lyrics as well, but and that was interesting, trying to find a way to encapsulate the entire story in a way, and the essence of the story. But I used the theme principally to help me to create that kind of melody and the flavor of the song. And Cara's done a great job. I mean, she's about 19, 20. I think she was 19 or 20 when she sung it, and she's still 20, 21, I think. But she's an amazing young singer based in London. She's from a Greek background, but she's also incredibly talented. She's just been on tour with Rita Ora. And she's signed to First Access, who also have signed Rita Ora and Ellie Goulding and people like that. So she's an up-and-coming young singer from the Brit School as well, which is where Adele came from. Fantastic new talent, and so it was great to get her at an early stage in her career, and she's delivered such a great rendition of the song. In
terms of finding a song that will encapsulate the whole film, I mean, do you find that in a specific lyric or the orchestration? I mean, how do you find that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was in the lyrics. You know, I mean, it was kind of, you know, you'll hear it when you hear the actual song. But I think it was trying to find a sense of Mowgli, particularly that at one point the song breaks down and there's just a piano and a voice, and I really wanted to create. I really wanted people to focus on the words to make sure that they could hear. You know, in literally in one verse, I tried to capture the entire story of Mowgli, but the scale and the power of the song needed to reflect the score as well, and to reflect the film. So it was about creating something that had that huge size to it. So I used the full orchestra. I also kind of made sure that I wanted a really big voice, and she's a real belter. I mean, she's got a lot of power to her and a really strong set of lungs. So, it was great to kind of get her to really push it. And it's, I think it feels like an exciting ending. It just feels very natural. It's quite seamless flow. And often I kind of feel like with a lot of films that I go to see, I feel taken out of the movie by the fact that there's a song that kind of feels totally disconnected, that's just been brought in for commercial reasons or whatever, and it doesn't really feel like it has anything to do with the film. Here, the melody is incorporated in the song, and the flavor and a lot of the sounds, and also Ashwin Srinivasan is playing the bansuri at the end of it, and so on. So it still stays in the same universe, and it's not so jarring to listen to, and that was very important to me too.
Something I always like to ask composers at times is, what led you to doing this? I mean, was it a love of music? Was it a love of movies? How did you end up, getting to the point where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved movies. I mean, since I was a kid, I loved the work, particularly of Bernard Herrmann and Ennio Morricone. I was just in awe of film composers since I was a kid. But then I also was an album artist, and I kind of started off making and still do make albums and produce artists and so on. So it kind of the two have evolved simultaneously for me, and have been very complementary to each other. So back in the 90s, early 90s, I started writing music for the BBC in England, and that really worked well because at the same time I had my album career evolving too. So that kind of the two, sometimes even album tracks that I was writing would find their way into scores that I was creating. So it's been interesting because, for example, as I was writing more and more string parts on some of the songs I was writing, I ended up using more and more strings and so on. And then, I'd write for bigger and bigger palettes, and then eventually entire orchestras.
And you've been BAFTA nominated before for Human Planet. What has that recognition meant for you?
It's been great. I mean, I've had some, the biggest thing for me was getting the Ivor Novello Lifetime Achievement Award last year, which was an amazing thing that happened. I mean, the BAFTA one was fantastic. The Human Planet series again was a very beautiful series, and that it's about human resilience, and getting recognition for that was perfect for me. I mean, what I try to do is pick projects that resonate for me on a personal level, in an emotional way, because I've got to feel emotionally connected to whatever I'm doing. But I really enjoy that process, and so that means talking to the directors about capturing their enthusiasm, their passion for what they've created, and when that's there, it's very easy to kind of to feel inspired and want to score things.
You mentioned Ivor Novello. Why did that mean so much for you?
Yeah, it was the Ivor Novello.
Novella, excuse me. Long day. Ivor Novello. Why did that mean so much for you?
Well, Ivor Novello Awards, I mean, they're incredible, in that it's from other musicians, and it's one of the most prestigious kind of awards there is. I mean, in London, so many people, Ed Sheeran and Adele and people like that win them on the pop side, but also, and people like Nile Rodgers and so on. But it's about songwriters, and it's also about real composers. So it's not just about the pop industry or anything like that. It's about the people who make the music and create the music. And so from that point of view, to get a Lifetime Achievement Award, I mean, the people who'd preceded me were a lot of them were great legends, and so I felt very honored by that. But also the fact that I'd been there many times and seen all these incredible musicians and composers come up on the stage. So actually to get that Lifetime Achievement meant a hell of a lot.
Well, it's a great movie and a powerful score. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on your work.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks for talking to me.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Cool.